So now let's talk about patterns of growth in plants. First of all, the growth of a plant is the product of the species of plant, its age and developmental stage, and also of its environment. Animals have the ability to react or respond to their environment primarily through movement, whereas plants are usually anchored in one particular position. Therefore, plants often respond to their environment by growing in different ways. Unlike many animals, plants continue to grow throughout their lifetime. And this continuous growth, regardless of the size that the plant reaches, is called indeterminate growth. The opposite of indeterminate growth would be determinate growth. That's when an individual or a particular organ reaches a certain size, and at that time it stops growing. And that's called determinate growth because the size at which growth will stop has been determined ahead of time. Indeterminate growth is adaptive for a plant. Keep in mind that many plants are vulnerable to herbivores and parasites. If a portion of a plant is lost because an herbivore consumes it, it's beneficial for the plant to regain the lost body part by new growth. Now, in both plants and animals, not all cells have the ability to divide. In animals, those that have the ability to divide are called stem cells. In plants, there are particular regions within the plant that have actively dividing cells, and these are called meristems. Okay, the cells found in meristems are not fully differentiated. Okay, that means that they haven't specialized completely, and after dividing, they can take on a more specialized function. So these undifferentiated cells found in the meristems have the potential to eventually become more than one different type of cell. So plants exhibit two different types of growth. Primary growth, which is the elongation of roots or shoots. So these allow a plant to grow taller, or a branch or root to grow longer, or a bud to extend to form leaves. And primary growth is controlled by regions called apical meristems. Remember that apical refers to the region at the end of a root or shoot. Okay, and remember that that comes from the word apex, which means the top of. Secondary growth is a type of growth in which plants grow wider. And secondary growth is controlled by lateral meristems. Okay, remember that lateral means on the side of. So instead of being located at the ends of roots and shoots, these lateral meristems are circular regions located around the sides of the shoot of a plant. Okay, this could be on the primary stem or it can be on branches coming off the side. Now, lateral meristems are typically found only in woody plants like trees and shrubs. Some plants exhibit only primary growth, and this is true of most monocots. Think about the fact that grasses are monocots. Grasses continue to grow taller, especially after being mowed, but they don't really get any thicker throughout their lifetime. Woody plants have two different lateral meristem regions. Okay, one of these is called the vascular cambium, and that's located in a ring about halfway between the center of the tree and the outside. Okay, that's responsible for adding vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, to a plant. And as we'll see later, the addition of this extravascular tissue is responsible for the annual growth rings of a tree. The cork cambium is located just beneath the periderm. Okay, remember that the periderm, rather than an epidermis, is the dermal tissue on the outside of a woody plant. This cork cambium adds width to the periderm, which is also known as the bark of the tree. Okay, so keep in mind that primary growth adds length to roots and shoots, whereas secondary growth increases the diameter or makes a shoot, a branch, or a trunk wider over time. We can see that on this small branch here, growth that's only 1 year old is not as wide as this thicker portion that's 3 years old. And the 2-year-old growth, of course, is intermediate between the 1-year-old and 3-year-old growth. But the extension of this branch in this direction is due to primary growth. We've gone over lots of different cell types and tissue types that are found in vascular plants. And in order for a multicellular organism to have these different cell types, a developing organism has to undergo a process called cell differentiation. Keep in mind that all cells in an organism have the same set of genes. So in order for the cell to take on a different structure and a different function from other cells found in the same plant, cellular differentiation has to take place because different genes are expressed in different cells. Okay, so just like in your body, a different set of genes are turned on in your liver cells that are turned on in your skin cells. There are different genes being expressed in the cells of roots than in the cells of leaves, for example. The cues that different cells receive about which genes to express and how to differentiate is determined by the position of the cell relative to other cells in the plant. And the cells transmit signals to surrounding cells by exchanging proteins that are received by receptors on the cell surface. Another important aspect of the growth patterns in plants is the timing of reproduction. Okay, when a plant produces flowers, it needs to transition some of the effort that it's putting into growth. It needs to transition some of the effort that it's putting into vegetative growth like the growth of roots and shoots, into reproductive growth. Okay, producing flowers also requires a lot of energy. So internal cues from the plant about the appropriate timing of reproduction and environmental cues like the amount of rainfall or the length of the day or the number of daylight hours at a particular season gives a plant a cue that it's time to reproduce. And unlike most vegetative growth, reproductive growth is determinate. Okay, a flower matures to a certain size, and then it stops the growth of the shoot that's leading to that flower. Okay, because the flower is ready. It doesn't need to grow any larger. And this would also be true of the growth that's involved in producing the fruits. Okay, remember that fruits are involved in the dispersal of the seeds of a plant. There are several different categories of plants based on the timing of their reproduction. Okay, if you're a gardener, you've probably heard of annual, biennial, and perennial plants. Annual plants complete their life cycle within a year or less. Okay, so a seed generally germinates in the spring, grows up, produces a flower, and the plant overwinters as a seed, and the cycle starts again in the spring. Gardeners know that they have to plant these annual plants every year if they want to see them in their garden again. And a lot of wildflowers and weeds also have an annual life cycle. Biennial plants require 2 years to reach reproductive maturity. Okay, so they're going to overwinter once as a vegetative structure and save up more energy to put into reproduction later. But they still flower and produce seeds in only one season, and then they die. Perennials are plants that store up energy between years and can live for many years, and most perennials are able to continue to reproduce for many years in a row. And as you would expect, different evolutionary pressures act on plants that have these different strategies. These annual plants need to put a lot of energy into reproduction because they don't get another chance. A perennial may have the ability to put less energy into reproduction and more energy into growth and survival in a particular year, depending upon the environment.